Cue the Music has spent the last 2 decades taking the sound of James Bond out of the cinema and putting it in front of live audiences. What started as a side project has grown into a full concert experience across the UK, including a forthcoming West End show with Bond composer David Arnold on stage. With a new run of concerts coming up, including that one-off, it feels like the right moment to look at how this all came together. So today, I'm delighted to be joined not only by my co-hosts, Bill Koenig and Javi Trujillo. Hi, guys.
Hello. Hey, David.
Also, Warren Ringham, founder of Cue the Music. Warren, welcome to the 007 Files.
Thank you, David. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for having me.
So basically, I wanted to really talk about, where Cue the Music came from, what it was like in the early days, and maybe talk about some of the struggles that you've had along the way, because we've been in contact for, I can't remember how many years now.
Quite a while, isn't it? Yeah, it must be. Yeah. It must be getting on for 10 years, I would say, maybe more.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure how far back it goes, because you got in contact with me asking me to promote your concerts, and when you were, well, let's say you weren't as successful as you appear to be just now. Let's go right back to the beginning. And why did you form Cue the Music? And why specifically did you want to perform Bond music?
Well, because I'm a fan, first and foremost. I think there's a few reasons behind how I came up with the idea and why I came up with the idea. But fundamentally, the central point is I'm just like you guys, just a massive Bond geek. Absolutely loved it since I was youngest age. I come from a really strong musical background with my family, professional brass players. My father actually worked on quite a lot of film music and did an album with John Barry. I don't know if you know the movie Ola albums. He was the principal trumpet on those. And so I grew up with music in my life. I grew up with film music, particularly in my life. I was often in the recording studio with my dad. My parents were divorced, and I would go along with my dad at the weekend when he was working and sit in the recording booths, TTS at Wembley and Abbey Road and what have you. And it was...
Well, that's quite an experience.
I know, but the thing is, when you're a kid and you grow up around that, you don't realize until later on, particularly when you're trying to make it a profession, just how unbelievable that was. It's not that you take it for granted. Well, it is actually that I just took it for granted because I didn't know any different. I can remember...
Abbey Road, so what?
I know. It sounds so ridiculous when the words coming out my mouth, but I can only say if you imagine you're born into that, you just the Albert Hall, the Festival Hall, the Barbican, all those big concert halls in London were a bit like my Saturday play area, running round the back. I think I was a well-behaved child, but my dad used to sort of leave us in the change rooms and stuff, me and my sister, and we would entertain ourselves and just grew up around that whole environment. It's actually even possible. It sounds ridiculous to say this, but it's entirely possible I was at those John Barry sessions and I just didn't even know that I was. And unfortunately...
Yeah, that would be amazing, wouldn't it, if you found out that you were?
Well, unfortunately, my dad passed away in 1999, which was years before I even started this. So I never wouldn't be able to find out, but it's possible that I could have been there. But anyway, digressing, I'd been through music college and I was going to have a career in professional music. That was something I'd always wanted to do since an early age. And I'd formed a function band in 99, just after my dad died, which was doing kind of general party music, weddings, that sort of thing. And we were really successful with that. But I really wanted to do something that was really niche and unique and something that would not just be run-of-the-mill that everybody was doing. And it just came to me one day. I thought, nobody's ever done a tribute to the music of James Bond. And no one had ever done it anywhere in the world at that point. And in fact, really the only way you could ever see a concert of Bond music was if you went to a John Barry special. And they were few and far between. And when they were just his music, really. You might have got a bit of Rough from Russia with Love in there, a bit of the theme tune from there. But otherwise, it was just his tracks. And of course, the challenge was, how do I make it doable in a kind of a band that would be, because initially my idea was to take it to functions really and do Bond themed events and corporate events, and find a lineup that would work, that would retain that epic sound, but not be so big that it was basically taking a 70-piece orchestra everywhere to someone's company bash isn't going to really fly. So I started it as a 13-piece band. And over the first few years, through recording demos and what have you, we just sort of started to get a little bit of interest around the internet from people seeing the videos on YouTube, Bond fans around the world. It was very small to start with, but enough interest that I started to think, actually, there are people out there like me that just want to share this passion of Bond music and have a safe space where they can go and see it performed. And it took a long, long time for us to move that into a theatre show. It was only in 2012 we did the first theatre show where people could actually come and see it, which was about 7 years after we formed it. And from there it just kind of grew gradually. And you mentioned the struggles. I still think about it now, like the whole time I've been through Cue the Music, it's always, I felt like I've just been at war with it, various things, rights with various issues with Eon over the years, and other bands that have kind of seen the success and gone, oh, we'll have a piece of that, and kind of trying to take the idea, and that's just inevitable. Also, just the finances, it's doing something like we do. It costs a lot of money to do it properly. I certainly didn't get into this, and I haven't stayed into it for the money. It's purely for the love of it, and I'm very, very lucky to say I get to do it.
I think for a long time, I'm right in saying, from memory anyway, that you were in the RAF, weren't you?
Yeah, I've just last year finished 22 years.
Okay.
And the great thing was, because I did my 22 years, I got my pension, which has allowed me to go and do this full time now, because I don't think I couldn't sustain myself doing it without that help. But I've been able to build up the show over 20 years, really as a side project, although for the last 10 years, it's really been a full-time job. I've been doing, 80, 90 hours weeks at times to kind of make the two things work. And it was just a wonderful moment last year when I got over the finish line. I crawled over the finish line to get my pension so that I could just now do this full-time. And I wake up every day and I feel I'm so lucky to get to do something I love, and something that's really a fan project, and I get to do it full-time. That's just amazing, really.
Yeah, it is amazing. It is amazing. Because I seem to remember that you had a plan at one stage to leave the RAF and then to go full-time with Cue the Music. Then I don't know quite what happened, but then at one point you announced that you were going to close it all down. So can you talk us through what happened there and how you got from that low to your current high?
The roller coaster of running this show has ups and downs. I say it's just been a battle. But the first stage of that was, I was kind of 3/4 of the way through my RAF career. I'd done about 17, 16 years. You have to give a year's notice to leave early. And I really I was so driven to want to do this band full time. It probably clouded my judgment in terms of what was the sensible thing to do. And I put in my notice to leave, and then it's because I was just that little bit too far to get to my pension point and carry on doing both things at the same time. It was just taking its toll. I had 2 young kids. I was just not seeing enough of them, my wife, not had enough time for myself. I was working till 2, 3 in the morning, getting up at 7, 6, 7 and going to work, and just doing this day after day after day. And I felt that I needed to leave the RAF and just go for it. And in some ways, I was really lucky the way things worked out, because I was about 6 months away from leaving in 2020 when COVID hit. And I say this with the greatest of compassion for what happened in COVID and how it affected so many lives badly. But in my case, if it had come 6 months later than it did, it would have been an absolute disaster for me. I probably would have lost everything in my life. I would have lost my house, everything, because I would have been in that really not sweet spot, the opposite to sweet spot, where I'd left, didn't have a wage, didn't have any track record, so I couldn't have got any of the furlough, couldn't have got any help. It would have been an absolute disaster. So I was able to reverse the decision and stay in the RAF, because, I was about to become self-employed at the worst moment in the whole of the history of the human race to do it. So,
grief, yeah.
So I went back to the RAF and I said, please, can I stay? Luckily, I was, I was in a good place with them, and they were happy for me to stay. But then I had that situation a few months down the line where I still can't go back to doing both things. And then I was kind of, by the time COVID had kind of got through, I was that little bit closer to my pension. I was thinking, I'd be absolutely mad to go now when my pension's so close. And then we'd been through an absolute, upheaval with COVID, as everybody will know, where everything was shut down. We'd had a whole tour cancelled. We were in terrible financial straits, really on the verge of going bankrupt for the second or third time that it happened. And I just had to and there were lots of micro reasons, which I won't bore your listeners with, but lots of micro reasons why I announced the end of the show. I had some uncertain health issues with my hearing at the time, and I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to even carry on playing and what have you. So we announced the end of the show with a year to run on it so that people would have the opportunity to sort of say goodbye, if you like, because it meant a lot to a lot of people by that point. And I wanted to make sure that people had the opportunity to kind of come and see the show one more time. At the time I made the decision, it was the right decision. But by the time the last show came around a year later and we got to that final show, I think everybody just felt we weren't ready to go yet. And at the end of the night, I had 1,000 people in the room, and then all the people on emails and messages saying, please bring it back at some point. Please don't give it up. And everyone in the band was saying, it's such a shame. And then you're kind of faced with the fact that if I'd have then, which I was thinking at that point, well, maybe I'll just shut it down for a few years and bring it back in 5 years. But if I had done that, I'd have had to have literally just cleared everything out. I'd have had to shut down the website. It costs a lot of money to run these things, the websites, the accounting fees, all the insurances, all the equipment, all the storage. And then there were a lot of, as I say, there's always been this thing of people kind of viewing what we do and thinking, oh, we'll have a piece of that Bond action. They're doing really well. They've just sold out their farewell show in the West End. There's obviously money to be made out of this. And I thought if I shut it down for 5 years, I probably won't have anything to come back to. So then I was kind of forced into doing my last 3 years in the RAF, where I was just this crazy situation of doing the two things alongside each other, which I didn't want to do. Ended up in hospital at one point thinking I was going to have a heart attack.
My God, yeah.
But made it through, and here I am, and we're there. And sorry, it's a very long answer, but it really is. It has been up and down, and with 20 years behind it, there are so many little stories along that way.
That was the kind of answer that I was looking for, because I think the music industry is really difficult, and the fact that you have kept going for so long is, it's quite an achievement in itself. So, and we're definitely glad that you didn't have a heart attack.
Well, do you know what all it was just anxiety in the end. It was just, I was just so stressed out and tired because I'd had 18 months by that point where I just was not getting more than 4 or 5 hours sleep a night. And I'm not David Zaritsky. I managed to survive on that. He lives on 4 hours sleep, and I can. But after a while, it just took its toll on me, and just you can only sustain that sort of thing for a certain period of time.
Yeah, I can't do it at all. I need 8 hours. If I don't have my 8 hours, my wife doesn't want to talk to me for the entire day.
Yeah.
Javi, Bill, do you have any questions at this stage or anything you want to add?
Yeah, obviously, James Bond has Q, and there's such a thing as music cues. But what made you decide on the name Q the Music as opposed to any other musically themed name for the band?
Well, like every story, there's a story behind the story. That we were the Bond band for the first 6 or 7 years, maybe. I'm trying to think exactly when we changed it. It would have been about 2012-ish. We changed to Q the Music because Eon sent a letter saying you can't be the Bond band anymore, and that's fine. No, you know what? Actually, despite having had a few letters over the years, it's fine. I'm not bitter about it. The name change actually was the best thing ever, really, because we have a really nice brand now, thanks to the amazing Ruben Wakeman and other help along the way. Paul Sachs, some of you got this lovely logo and a name that really, really works. And it was actually my mum who came up with the name Q the Music.
It's a great name. It's fantastic.
Yeah, we put it out there and had lots of suggestions. And she was the one that sort of came as soon as she said it. It was like, yeah, that's the one. And it just really, really works, doesn't it?
No, absolutely, it does. Yeah.
Pardon me, I just want to be sure I got the timeline right. So the original name was the Bond Band,
Yeah.
and then you got a letter from Eon Productions. No, stop it. And then you go ahead.
Initially we did it. One of the first ever shows or gigs we did was a charity event for London Air Ambulance. We were raising money for London Air Ambulance, and I asked Eon for permission to show. It would have been Casino Royale as part of this event. And they were really nice. I have to say the letter was really polite. And they said, look, we can't do it. It's just, that's not something we really can do. But what we'll do, we're going to donate I think it would have been a DVD box set for you for the charity auction, which was really fabulous. And part of that conversation, I asked if I could, I told them what we were doing. I said, can I call it the Bond Band? And this was a telephone call back in the day, 2007, something like that. And whoever I spoke to at Eon, I couldn't tell you who it is, very informally said, you can call yourself what you like, as long as you don't use any of our images or logos or anything else, call yourself what you like. But I think what happens is when you have a modicum of success, and I mean, even then it was very small success, and you start to sort of make waves, then they start to look at you a bit closely. And actually what they said was the Bond Band makes it sound like you are the Bond Band, as if you're affiliated. And so they said to change it. Every time we've had one of these letters, the initial thing is just, it's like that stomach churning, gut wrenching, horrible feeling when you get that letter.
I've received lawyers' letters from them as well.
Yeah. It's awful when
here in the United States there was something like that. It was the Tonight Show when Johnny Carson was the host. When that was wrapping up, the band was going to go around calling themselves the Tonight Show Band. Then NBC said, "No, you cannot do that." And then they came up with an alternate name. So when you told that anecdote just now, that reminded me of that. So the music business, you can have twists and turns along those lines.
And I've had it explained to me really well over the years that, that they have to be seen to be protecting their product, their brand, because, otherwise people just take the mick, don't they? And I have to say, I haven't got any business about it. We're talking about it. I probably shouldn't really even be talking about it necessarily, but I don't view it anymore as a negative. Actually, changing to Cue the Music has been the best thing because we have our own identity. And actually, Cue the Music, we have done other things other than Bond over the years now as well. It's not just been Bond, although that is really predominantly what we do. And so, it is what it is,
Yeah, absolutely. So one other thing that I'm kind of really curious about is that when you're putting a show together, what absolutely has to be in it and what gets left out, even if you personally like it?
Yeah.
Does that happen?
Yes, because what I tend to do is split up. We have our major London show, which is always really aimed at the real hardcore Bond fans. So they fly in from all over the world, as you guys know. It's become like a real annual event, Bond community event, really now, that London one. And I know that I can afford to be a bit more risky with what I put on that one. And risky in terms of I can do a suite from Live and Let Die or from Goldfinger, and I can cut things like songs that maybe are considered on the weaker end of the scale, although they're all brilliant, of course. But things like maybe Moonraker, All Time High, make room for it in a concert. On the sort of UK tour where we're going around doing our standard show, I know I have to do all of the Bond songs as an absolute given, with the exception we don't do Die Another Day. But then that gives me a little bit of room. We'll put in maybe 3 or 4 songs or cues that aren't from those title themes. And that's really the limit, because we start our show at 7:30 and we finish at gone 10:10. It's late. And so, and if I take the show to the back end of wherever, Wales, Scotland, England, or whatever, and we're selling as a James Bond concert, if I don't do all the Bond songs, then people complain. I mean, I remember this is how hard it is as a Bond geek. Then you guys will understand how frustrating this is. I remember we did a show in Camberley once where I'd left a couple of songs out and I put in Flight into Space from Moonraker, which is like, one of the holy grail Barry pieces for me, just absolutely stunning. And we were about a minute into a 5-minute version of Flight into Space. And one guy got up, walked out to the bar, got a pint and came back. And then somebody overheard somebody else in the toilet at the break saying, "Oh, it's an amazing band, but what was that brass band music they were doing?" Talking about Flight to Space. So you have to know when is the right time to do it. So unfortunately, sometimes we get, real Bond geeks, Bond community people that come along to those tour shows, and sometimes I get an email saying, "Well, I hope you do more cues because I see them on YouTube." And I'm always sort of really apologetic, say, "Look, make sure you come to the London show because that's where we do those deep cuts." But then, the London show is where I get to really get all the toys out and have a lot of fun with the program, and that's a really great part where I get to pick and choose stuff that I know that people will really enjoy. And actually, sometimes the interesting thing is not telling people what it's going to be, because they come along and sometimes if I told people what it was going to be, they'd have preconceptions about what they think of it. Like, for example, the For Your Eyes Only suite that we did in 2022, which was 12 minutes of music from For Your Eyes Only. A lot of people would go, "Do I really want to hear 12 minutes of music from For Your Eyes Only?" When we played it, they did, because that's part of the fun of doing it. We bring that live energy and that enthusiasm to it. And so many people came out of it going, "Oh my God, I enjoyed it much more than I thought I would have done." So that's a really fun part about putting together a program.
I've got to say, as somebody who goes to gigs, not as much as I used to, but I think it's an advantage when a band does have a different set list each night, because so many bands play the same songs time after time after time. And you go one night and it's the same as going 3 nights later or 2 weeks later. And it's much better to have a bit of variety there anyway, if the audience is going to different venues, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. It's as I say, it's the challenges on the tour. I mean, we have a bit of flexibility with what I call the special items, where I'll change them from show to show. And we always, this tour, we do part of our opening sequence. I mean, this is how deep it goes. We start the show with the GoldenEye trailer music, which is deep cut. Amazing, but deep cut. And then we go into Bond 77. And at the end of Bond 77, we get that ba-da-ba-bum, and the whole thing goes to blackout. And there's sort of wind whistling as it's in blackout. And then after sort of 20 seconds, the whole thing comes up in red, white, and blue with a Union Jack. And we go into that very same version of the Bond theme from The Spy Who Loved Me when the Union Jack opens. So, we get a chance to do things like that. And I think that's something that only Q Music will do. I know there are lots of Bond concerts out there now, and I always say now, it's easy to put together a concert of Bond songs, but it's hard to do it properly and do it from a point of view where it's really driven by a deep love of Bond. And our show is full of little Easter eggs. If you keep your eyes open, there's all sorts of things to unpack. The Moonraker shuttle, we've got a little gobo in the light. So we've got the Moonraker shuttle that goes over the audience and in Moonraker. And if you really keep your eyes open in Living Daylights, there's another one that's flashing around on the ceiling that says, "It's Mionum." Stuff that you would never think of unless you're an absolute
brilliant
Bond actor.
Brilliant. Bill, I think you wanted to ask.
Yes, this is a little bit in the weeds. The original Bond music and songs were arranged for an orchestra of maybe 80 to 100 musicians. When you put together one of your concerts, what is it like to do the arrangements for this music? Because you can't replicate it. You have a smaller group of musicians. What is that like?
Well, thank you for asking that question, because I love that question, because it gives me the opportunity to say, and I had a conversation with David Arnold about this, and he really agreed with me. And I said, I think there's a bit of a misconception about Bond music being orchestral, because it definitely is if you take the cues and the film music, but the songs, After You Only Live Twice, possibly Diamonds Are Forever, they're not orchestral tracks. They are pop and rock tracks with orchestral backings, which is quite different. Certainly You Only Live Twice, I would say, is an orchestral track with a rhythm section backing. And certainly Diamonds Are Forever has got that really lush string sound. But really after that, I think it really, really changes. And actually, when you go and see a Bond concert played by an orchestra, it does have an epic sound and it is stunning, but they really struggle to recreate the rock and pop sound of everything really from Live and Let Die onwards. And even David said, it's a real challenge in a concert hall to get that right, because you need to have a lot of speakers up to really, and real kind of pop rock rhythm section to really make that work. So having the larger size band that we do means that we can achieve a really, really great band sound. But, I mean, the only thing we do have is that we do have the strings on our sort of touring show. They are synth strings. But it does just work. And I think if you've seen, anyone that's seen the show will back that up. I mean, very occasionally we get people say, I missed the live strings, but 99% of the audience say, they don't. And actually, I think what I've learned over the years is that the nauseating detail that we go to, the imperceptible detail, that if you take off and peel back layer after layer after layer of what's going on in the band, and the things the details that we've put in, we've put in, that all kind of layer up really what make the sound of Cue the Music work. And I don't think that when you go and see Cue the Music, you're not kind of hankering for that full orchestra, because we've been doing it 20 years and we know how to make it sound right. There are a couple of tracks like You Only Live Twice where you can't beat that lush 80-piece string section. But, 80-90% of the tracks, they are pop rock tracks with orchestral backings, and we can do that, and we can make that sound right.
Along that line, what's been the most challenging piece of music to bring to the stage?
I said this to David the other day, because I always get asked this question. I always say anything by David Arnold, which is ironic because this year we're doing a concert with everything by David Arnold, which is the worst, the hardest thing. He laughed. We did an interview and he was laughing. We said, come on, it's not that bad. No, there are some tracks of David's which aren't so bad. But yeah, I mean, Backseat Driver, Majesty's Secret Service, Propeller Heads, Come In 007, any of those kind of really up-tempo, funky tracks with so much going on by David Arnold, they're the really, really hard ones to do.
Is it because of the more quirky instrumentation in those, like the techno sounds, that make it more challenging?
Yeah, partly. Just also, there's just a lot of notes to play, and it's, David's music has a lot of ideas going on at the same time and coming together in this really clever way, how everything kind of weaves in and out. The brass tend to be quite sort of really punchy with lots of high notes. The woodwind kind of punctuate things, all but different to what's going on with the brass. And then you have these lovely lush string lines, sometimes with quite a lot of notes going on in them. And then the rhythm section, there's always a lot going on, and a lot of times the funky bass lines, and sort of fusing the old style composition technique of melody of John Barry with a more modern sound design idea. I mean, I think David Arnold's the only person that I can really think of that's really mastered the art of that old style melody composition with a more modern sound design, which a lot of composers now, when you go and see films, it's all sound design and no melody.
Yeah.
Well, yeah,
it's a big
absolutely.
problem. And I think that's one of the reasons why he's so embraced by the community, is because he balances both those worlds. And given the fact that you have this upcoming concert with him, so we're recording this before that show happens. So up to this point, what's been the most fulfilling moment for you on stage?
There's a few. Would you mind if I give you a couple? Because they are,
of course,
and
Go ahead.
hard to. They're so different in their reasons, and as Bond fans, you'll understand why. I think the most humble, proudest moment, and just, it's even hard to find the words to describe it, but having the honor of being asked to play at Sir Roger Moore's memorial. And I always say it, and I really mean it, I felt like we were representing the fan community when we were there, because it was a small event. I mean, Barbara and Michael were there, lots of actors like Michael Caine and Joan Collins and obviously all of Roger's family, but it was a very intimate, private event for his close circle. And we were the only kind of outsiders that were asked to kind of bring musical support. And I mean, I stood there when we were waiting to play, as we were waiting for this memorial to start. And it was a moment where I suddenly went, oh my God, what have I done? Because I suddenly thought the pressure just suddenly was like, if we mess this up, how we've just ruined everything, like we've ruined it for everybody. And I also felt powerless in that moment, because I thought I am totally at the mercy of what everybody in my band delivers here. And I knew we were all nervous. But what's great about the guys in the band is no matter how high the stakes have been, they've always kind of raised the level when it's been like that. And now I'm relaxed about it, because I know no matter how high the stakes are, no matter how high the pressure is, and the David Arnold concert will be one of those, they just seem to find another gear. And that's an incredibly empowering thing. And as a band leader, you have to empower them. You have to let go and trust the people, that you get great people around you and then trust in them. And that was one of those moments where it kind of really came down to that. But if you'd have told a 10-year-old, 15-year-old me that I was going to be there at Sir Roger Moore's memorial providing the music, you can't. I've said this before.
That's quite a compliment.
Yes. You couldn't even describe it as a dream come true, because I couldn't have even dreamt of that.
Yeah, it's amazing. Amazing.
Can I ask another question? Yeah. This is more on you. I have one foot in the professional and one foot in the fan. So this is more on the fan side. You are totally immersed in the music and songs of Bond. Is there any one composer who your appreciation has grown over the years? I have an example, but I want to hear yours.
Such a good question. I've really come to love the scores of Live and Let Die and For Your Eyes Only, more so even as we've played the music. I mean, I really liked it before, but actually playing them has really got me into it. But I actually have to say, and my estimation of him was already sky high, but working on all David Arnold's music this year for this concert, and I mean, I know this is an audio podcast, but you guys were on video. These 3 scores here, this is David's 3 scores that he's lent me, complete handwritten scores for Casino,
wow,
Quantum of Solace, and
don't spill your coffee on them.
I know.
Yeah.
So he gave me so I can get the actual versions, into the computer to then print part to the music. And working on it has given me a whole new appreciation of, one, what a genius he is, and 2, I wish you could kind of come and do a bit of what I've been doing and understand how much work has gone into it. And I mean, I've been just transferring the music from handwritten into the computer, and it's been weeks and weeks and weeks of 18, 20-hour days. And as I'm doing it, I'm thinking, how the heck has he done this in the time that he's done it? Because it's not just a case of writing it down. He's got to think of it first, come up with music that we all love.
This is one thing that's always struck me, that how fast film composers work. It's incredible.
Yeah.
When it comes to TV in the old days, a composer might have 3 days, if that, to turn in a score for an hour-long TV show. It's like you get the assignment on Friday or Thursday, and have it for me on Monday. I mean, that's
unbelievable, isn't it?
An aside.
I don't know how they do it. I mean, and the thing is, working on I've been teasing little bits and pieces, but 2 tracks that we're doing African Rundown and we're doing Miami International. Both of them are just so clever. I mean, Miami International, the tempo, the time changes in it and stuff, it's so involved. And the level of thinking and computing and creation that's in there, and working to a time restriction whilst also having to match it to what's on screen, it's just unbelievable. It really is.
Well, just to reinforce part of Warren's answer just now, I was 15 when Live and Let Die came out, and I had my first soundtrack I actually purchased was Diamonds Are Forever. And then then Live and Let Die comes out. What happened to John Barry? And I was initially disappointed, but that score has grown on me over the years because George Martin was essentially playing within the Barry template, but it wasn't just a copy. And I appreciate it more as years go on. Just that's an aside.
I caught your recent interview with David Arnold and the Bond Experience and Calvin Dyson and Heavy Spoilers, and where he talked about African Rundown being, was it 17 minutes long originally or 25 minutes long, and how they kept cutting the scene down for pacing. I can't imagine what that original piece would even sound like what's left on the cutting room floor. And maybe someday if we get a release from La La Land, maybe that's around somewhere, I would hope.
I don't think it is, because I've got the one that he's got written in here, which is what they went to the session with, is the one that ends up on the soundtrack.
Okay, so it wasn't ever recorded then, to your knowledge?
To my knowledge. I mean, but I have to say, I mean, I'm only giving, I said, just an opinion from what I've seen, but I could be completely wrong on that. But I think what's really interesting, actually, because this is David's copies that have been given to Nick Dodds, his orchestrator, and Nick's written them out. And then from there, they go to the parts for the band. So there are some little things that are in these scores that have changed on the recording, but I'm talking about things like an entry that was on horn in there has maybe gone on to trumpet on the recording, which has made it a bit of a challenge for me, because obviously I want it to be right. So I'm trying to get the best of both worlds, where it's David's original version, but also what we know. I mean, the differences are very, very tiny. They're nuanced, and it's not like they've had massive changes. It's pretty much bar for bar what it is in there. It's just tiny little details where they've obviously sat in the recording studio and gone, well, actually, let's change that from short to long, or little things like that. But I think what they've recorded is the version that you hear on the soundtrack. And in the film, there's a couple of little minor cuts in the film version. I think there's a few bars that have gone from this version, which is the soundtrack recorded version that's in the film. But one thing I found really interesting talking to David that I kind of can't get my head around as the purist in me, but it's how relaxed he is about the fact that when he's recorded that music, it's not his anymore. He kind of hands it over to the editor and director and said, kind of do what you will, if you like. I'm sure he still has a hand in it, but it's kind of he sort of talks often about how it's been such a collaborative process. And he writes this music and he just has to accept that they're going to maybe take a cue that he wrote for one scene and insert it somewhere else, which has happened on a few of his films. So I think that's really an incredibly generous, sort of almost noble attitude to have as a composer, because I think if it was my music, I'd feel quite, I'd want to retain that ownership over it a little bit and say, no, you can't cut that bit out. I really like that bit. You can't do that as a composer, can you?
No. But one thing that we haven't talked about with David Arnold is, how did you get in contact with him, and how is it that he is playing one of your concerts? Well,
so after the Roger Moore Memorial, which was about 9 years ago, if I remember rightly, I think Gareth, who was Roger's friend and agent, we got on really well, got a good relationship. And, I think he was really happy with how we'd done and how I'd kind of been around that whole thing. And as a thank you, he invited me to this talk that David was giving the following week, which was a sit down, like 5-course meal thing. And then David talking afterwards. I was, he said, "Oh, would you like to come, David's talk?" Yeah, are you kidding? And I thought I'd just maybe get to say hello. I'd arrived at this reception, it was drinks reception first, and then David came in, and I sort of was on the other side of the room and hadn't gone over to say hello. Gareth, Roger's friend, bowled up and said, "Oh, have you said hello to him yet?" And I said, "Oh, no, not, hadn't had the courage to go over." He said, "Oh, come on, I'll introduce you." And he took me over, and I got to talk to David for about 5 minutes or so, which I was happy with. Like, that was a dream come true.
Mm-hmm.
And then David went off to sort of meet some other people, and I sort of stood there just thinking, wow, that was just amazing. And then Gareth came over and sort of said, right, everybody, take your seats for the dinner. And David went off to his seat, and Gareth said, oh, I'll show you where you're sitting. And then Gareth took me and sat me next to David Arnold. And I was that was me. I was done. I had probably, it must have been an hour and a half this meal just went on for, and I had him literally to myself for an hour and a half.
Did you manage to eat anything?
Well, I did. I was trying to be normal. David said, and you'd probably seen the interview, David said I was just really normal and just chatted like a normal person, which is not how I remember it. I remember the big geek, going and just asking him all these questions that I'd always wanted to ask. Well, maybe 5% of the questions I wanted to ask him. And we just got on really, really well. But at some point during that meal, probably about an hour in, I think it was, Gareth kind of just appeared and just started chatting to both of us. And he, I hadn't mentioned Cue the Music at all, because I wouldn't be that guy that went, I run a James Bond band, he wouldn't, I thought, he doesn't care about that. And I was much more interested anyway about asking him questions and tapping into his knowledge and stuff. And Gareth sort of mentioned, oh, Warren runs a James Bond band called Cue the Music. Now, I don't really know how much David knew of Cue the Music at that point, but whether he was just being really polite. His conversation with me led me to believe that he was at least aware of us and had maybe seen some stuff. And he certainly, from what I was gleaning from what he was asking me, it felt like he'd maybe seen a couple of things. And he was complimentary, but I would never have repeated that to anybody because it was a private conversation. And I met him again a few months later, a Q&A that he was doing. And I just went up with my book of the music of Bond for him to sign it. And I would never have gone up and said, hi, do you remember me? I was just happy to just have my book signed. And really nice message. And as I turned to sort of go, he sort of went, Warren. And I sort of went, yeah, hi, David. He went, well, how are you doing? He kind of put two and two together. And he said, oh, I've been meaning to ask you, can I get a copy of your version of Backseat Driver? You want a copy of our your piece? Yeah. So then I asked Gareth, I said, look, is there any chance I could have his email address? Because he's asked me for this copy. And so at that point I had his private email address. And I think it's, in that situation, it's as important to know when not to use it as when to use it. And so over the next 7 or 8 years, we would occasionally swap emails, and I would always just try not to outstay my welcome. He was always so lovely and always just really gave all the time to me and always answered my questions and stuff. But I was always careful not to overreach and over contact, and just sort of just be respectful really, and be the fan and not. I was never after anything with him, and genuinely I wasn't. And it wasn't never even on my radar to ask him to do anything with Cue the Music. But probably a couple of years ago, I started to think, do you know what? We're kind of, the way things are going, there might be one day when I might say to him, would you like to do something? I started to think about asking him, and I had this email written. And it was writing itself. And I probably for about 2 years, when's the right time to send it? Because I thought, if I ask him and he says no, I can never ask him again. And I'm stepping over that line where he might go, who are you? Go away. And so getting up the courage to ask him was the biggest hurdle. And when I sat down finally to write this email, I'd written it 15,000 times in my head. And I reread it about 15,000 times before I sent it. And my fingers hovering over send forever and a day. And I finally thought, stuff it, I'll send it, which is basically an email as long as any of the answers to any of the questions you've asked, they're far too long. And I clicked send and I thought, right, I've done it now. So I got up from this office. I went downstairs to make myself a drink. And I hadn't even finished making the drink. And the email comes back from David saying, basically, I'm in. And it just speaks to what an amazing guy he is, because
Brilliant.
he couldn't have even read that email properly. The headline was, do you want to do something? Here's what I've got in mind. Here's what I think we can do. And he was in, and I mean, like the feeling, tears, like a few little tears of joy, obviously. Yeah. And that's it really. And we've just been chatting from there and putting together this amazing one-off concert.
Can I ask a Mr. Obvious question? This is on the fan side rather than the professional side. Do you have a preference who should score the first Amazon Bond film?
David Arnold. Well, that's not...
I said it was Mr. Obvious.
Yeah. So, I'm sorry, all my answers long. I'll give a really quick thing about, because I like, you've mentioned it a couple of times about the fan versus, like, for me, I have to be a professional as well. And sometimes that's quite hard to straddle that line, because if I let too much fan in, it could bleed into the professional side and stop me delivering a professional performance for people that are paying to come and see a concert. But also I've got to let enough fan into it that comes through to them, because that's what people want to see. They want to know that a fan's behind it. So I have to really straddle that line and not go too far one way or the other. But the answer to that question, the fan in me would say David Arnold, but I think it will probably be Hans Zimmer, for all the reasons that you will all know as well as I do. I think the links with. I
think I heard David sigh just now, but
yeah. I have really missed David Arnold in the last 3 films, and I know it's unlikely that he'll come back under Amazon, but I would love him to do the first Amazon Bond.
Don't you guys think it's a no-brainer win as well for Amazon?
Yeah.
If they've cleared out all of the old guard, there's no one really working backstage, casting or anything like that. It's all new. If you want to signal to the Bond fan world, we got this, trust us. But the first thing I would do is I would go, David Arnold's doing the score, and everyone's going to go, okay.
Because, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, he's still the house composer.
Yeah.
Well, and also David would be the thread, the one thread to the
bridge. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. Easy win, isn't it? Easy win.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But I think the reality is Hans Zimmer's got the links, obviously, with Villeneuve. He's got the last film in his bag, so he's kind of show he can do it. I do think it was a good score. There's nothing that he did that David Arnold couldn't do and better. But I do think it was in my opinion, I think it was a better score than what we got from Thomas Newman. It still was a little bit lacking in places compared to, the traditional David Arnold, John Barry score, What did you guys think? Do you think it'll be Hans Zimmer?
I don't know, but I hope not, because I don't really think his style suited Bond at all.
Given his connections, it makes sense, like you said, based on their past history, and he's a popular composer, and I know, like, my cousin adores Hans Zimmer and was really happy that he got the nod for No Time to Die. But like for me, some of the best parts of that score were the ones where he was imitating David Arnold. When you're driving through Matera and it sounds like a David Arnold score, or the Cuba Chase, which, he and Arnold performed on stage. Like, that felt the most like classic Bond to me. And I would like to hope that because Arnold did that rearrangement for Road to a Million, that maybe he's got his foot in the door with someone still, or I don't know if that was leftover Eon, how much Amazon would pay attention to that. But I mean, that's just another B in his Bond.
He's definitely done stuff with Amazon. I mean, the First Light song is obviously linked with Amazon. There's no question that he has ties to Amazon. But yeah, it's the thing is, he always says as well. David's always the first one to say it's that dynamic with the director that's got to work, because if you've got a director who doesn't really want you, it's a bad place to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's more than just. It may not even come down to Amazon's decision.
My main issue with Hans Zimmer is how much is Hans Zimmer? How much is it of his army of composers who work with him? Steve Mazzaro. I mean, Hans Zimmer said, Steve is my co-composer. Well, they didn't want to give him that credit, but in No Time to Die, just, Hans Zimmer is like a conglomerate now when it comes to music for movies.
I've got a saying for it. He's the first composer to franchise himself. Has a building full of people that write in the Hans Zimmer name. But also, I think he gets a bit of a free pass with his music because there's no question there's some brilliant Hans Zimmer scores, but they tend to be his earlier ones. I was watching just yesterday, I was watching The Last Samurai, and it's such a brilliant film, and the score in it is really, really good. But it's been a long time since he's written like that for me, and I think the trouble with doing so many scores that he's clearly diluted, and also he is fallen into this pattern of a lot of composers now of, like we said, composing much more in the soundscape, sound design genre.
It's more sonic wallpaper than melody.
Yeah.
Well, I think we've gone well over our allotted 45 minutes that we always aim for. So, Warren, thank you for joining us. It has been an absolute pleasure having you on, and I reckon we could probably keep on talking for at least another hour.
My answers probably would be sorry. I've been
No, that's what we want. We want guests who can talk. Absolutely. So, your upcoming concerts and the one-off West End show with David Arnold bring the music of 007 into a live setting, and I will add a link to your website so people can see where you're playing, when you're playing, and buy tickets. Or if you're listening, you can just Google Cue the Music. That's the letter Q as in the Gadget Master. So, Warren, thanks a lot for coming on, and I think, we'll get you back at some stage before Bond 26 comes out, I'm sure.
That would be an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for having me on, gentlemen. It's been a real honour. 3 such distinguished presenters themselves. Yeah,
I don't know about that.
Yeah.
Anything either of you two wants to add before we wrap up?
No, thanks.
Okay, well, if you're listening to this episode of the 007 Files and you're not a subscriber, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, and we will be back with more soon.